They told me I was walking out into the world with nothing. No money, no family, just a statistical probability of failure. I believed them. I stood there on my 18th birthday, holding the only inheritance I'd ever received, a heavy, rusted key to a tractor that likely didn't run, on a farm that supposedly didn't exist. I had no idea that this piece of scrap metal was actually a breadcrumb trail, leading to a 20-year-old secret, a tragedy buried in the Kentucky hills, and a grandfather who had spent a decade waiting for a ghost. This key wasn't just a piece of iron, it was a loaded gun pointing at the past, and I was about to pull the trigger. Before we find out what was waiting for me in the tall grass, please take a split second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out and ensures we can keep bringing you these stories. Now, let me take you back to the office where it all began. The clock on the wall of Susan Hart's office was a generic, battery-operated thing that ticked with a loudness that seemed to mock the silence in the room. It was the only sound in the world. I sat in the plastic chair, the kind that digs into your shoulder blades, and stared at the particle board desk. It was my 18th birthday. In the state of Ohio, that meant I was no longer a ward of the state. I was a problem solved. I was a file being closed. Susan Hart, the director of St. Catherine's, looked tired. She always looked tired, a woman worn thin by the friction of 1,000 sad stories passing through her hands. She didn't look me in the eye when she slid the manila envelope across the laminate surface. It was thin. Terrifyingly thin. "That's it, Leo," she said, her voice soft, lacking the bureaucratic edge she used with the younger kids. "We went through the archives. When you were dropped off, this was pinned to your blanket." I reached out, my hand trembling just slightly, a tremor of anticipation, or maybe dread. I opened the clasp and tipped the envelope. There was no rustle of banknotes, no heavy thud of a deed or a stack of savings bonds. There was just a metallic clatter. A key fell onto the desk. It was heavy, made of iron that had tasted oxidation. It wasn't a house key, and it certainly wasn't a car key. It was simple, jagged, and brutal. Attached to it by a twisted piece of baling wire was a yellow plastic tag, the writing faded by sun and time, but still legible in black marker. "Morgan Hollow Farm, 1987. "That's all?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, dry and cracked. "That's all," Susan said. She finally looked up and I saw the pity there. I hated the pity more than the poverty. "We checked the records, Leo. Your mother, she didn't leave a note. She didn't leave a name. Just you and that key." I picked it up. The metal was cold, sucking the heat right out of my fingertips. "Nobody leaves a baby with a tractor key," I whispered. "It has to mean something." "It's a dead end, Leo," Susan said gently. "We tried looking into property records years ago. Morgan Hollow is a ghost town in Kentucky. There's nothing there for you." I stood up. I was 18. I had $300 saved from working under the table at a landscaping crew, a backpack full of secondhand clothes, and a key to a place that supposedly didn't exist. "Thank you, Mrs. Hart," I said, pocketing the key. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Home," I said, though I had no idea what that word meant. The bus ride took 14 hours. I watched the world change through the dirty glass of the Greyhound window. The flat industrial grays of Ohio gave way to the rolling green hills of the river valley, and then, as we crossed into Kentucky, the land began to buckle and fold. The roads grew narrower, winding like dark ribbons through hollers deep enough to swallow the sun by mid-afternoon. By the time I got off in the town of Hazard, the air tasted different. It tasted of sulfur, damp earth, and pine resin. I spent $20 on a local shuttle that dropped me off 5 miles outside of a place called Morgan Hollow. The driver, a man with grease under his fingernails and a skeptical squint, looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You got family up here, son?" "I don't know," I said. He dropped me at a gravel turnoff marked by a rotting wooden post. I stood there as the shuttle's taillights disappeared around the bend, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt heavy. The only sound was the wind moving through the canopy of poplars and oaks. I tightened the straps of my backpack and started walking up the gravel road. The walk was a slow reveal of desolation. I passed a mailbox that had been smashed in decades ago. I passed fence lines where the barbed wire lay rusted and coiled in the high grass like dead snakes. And then the trees broke, and I saw it. Morgan Hollow Farm. It was a corpse of a place. The farmhouse sat on a rise, a Victorian structure that might have once been white, but was now the gray of weathered bone. The roof on the west side had collapsed inward, looking like a caved-in skull. The porch slumped dangerously to the left. The barn was worse. It was just a pile of splintered lumber and tin sheets, flattened by some long-forgotten storm. My heart hammered a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs. This was it? This was my inheritance? A pile of rot in the middle of nowhere? I waded through waist-high weeds, burrs latching onto my jeans. I walked toward the house, stepping carefully over broken glass on the porch. I didn't even try the front door. It was hanging off one hinge. I looked into the gloom of the hallway, smelling the potent cocktail of mildew, raccoon droppings, and wet plaster. It was uninhabitable. I turned back to the yard, anger rising in my throat, hot and acidic. They told me nobody left me anything. They were right. This was less than nothing. This was a burden. Then I saw it. Sitting in the center of the overgrown yard, nearly swallowed by a thicket of briars, was a tractor. It was a John Deere 4020, a model from the 60s. The green paint was oxidized to a chalky matte, and surface rust coated the engine block like a disease. The rear tires were flat. The rubber cracked and dry-rotted. It looked like a dinosaur skeleton left to bleach in the sun. I walked over to it. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand shook as I climbed up the metal step, avoiding a wasp nest tucked under the fender. I sat on the metal seat, the springs groaning under my weight. I looked at the ignition switch. I slid the key in. It clicked. A perfect fit. I didn't try to turn it. There was no point. The battery would be dead. The fuel turned to varnish. The pistons seized. But the key fit. I sat there on that dead machine as the sun went down behind the ridge, casting long, purple shadows across the valley. I felt foolish. I felt the stinging burn of tears I refused to shed. I was Leo Morgan, the boy with the key to a broken tractor on a dead farm. I had nowhere else to go. The temperature dropped, and the mountain air bit through my thin jacket. I curled up on the metal seat, pulling my knees to my chest, and closed my eyes, listening to the crickets scream in the high grass. I woke to the smell of coffee. It was rich, dark, and impossible. I jerked upright, nearly falling off the tractor seat. My neck was stiff, and my legs were cramping. A truck was parked near the end of the driveway, a battered Ford F-150. Standing at the fence line was a woman. She looked to be in her 70s, wearing a quilted vest over a flannel shirt, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She held a thermos in one hand and a tin container in the other. She wasn't looking at me with suspicion. She was looking at me with a profound, quiet sadness. "I wondered if someone would ever come back," she said. Her voice was like the landscape, rough, but with a musical lilt to it. I climbed down from the tractor, my boots crunching in the weeds. "Who are you?" "Martha Jones," she said. "I live on the next ridge over. Your grandmother and I used to trade canning recipes." She held out the thermos cap, steaming with black coffee. "Drink. You look like you froze half to death." I took the cup. The heat spread through my hands, shocking my system. "You knew them?" "I knew all of them," Martha said. She gestured to the porch. "Come on. The steps are rotten, but the swing is still holding on. Let's sit." We sat on the dusty porch swing, the chains squeaking rhythmically. Martha opened the tin, revealing homemade biscuits with sausage. I ate like a starving animal, and she pretended not to notice my desperation. "This was the Morgan place," she began, looking out over the ruined fields. "Samuel and Ruth. They were good people mostly, hard people. You have to be, to work this ground. And my mother?" I asked, a crumb of biscuit falling to my lap. "Claire," Martha said softly. "Her name was Claire. She was the light of this valley. Wild, smart, funny. She left in '99. She was 17. Martha looked at me, her eyes sharp. "She was pregnant, unmarried, in those days, in this town, with a father like Samuel. That was a hard thing." I looked at the ruins around me. "So they died and left it to rot?" "No," Martha said. She pointed a calloused finger toward the tractor in the weeds. "See that machine? The junk heap?" "That isn't junk," Martha said firmly. That was Samuel's penance. She shifted on the swing, looking at the tractor with a strange reverence. "Your grandfather, Samuel, he was a proud man. A religious man, but the fire and brimstone kind. When Claire left, he broke. But he never admitted it. Not until the end." She took a breath. For the last 12 years of his life, Samuel didn't farm. He sold off the cattle. He let the fields go, but every Saturday, rain or shine, I'd see him out there. His hands were crippled with arthritis, shaking so bad he could barely hold a wrench, but he was out there working on that 40-20. His father taught him to drive on a tractor like that. He was rebuilding it. I looked at the rusted hulk. Why? Because he was waiting, Martha whispered. He knew he drove his daughter away. He knew he might never see her again, but he got it in his head that maybe, one day she'd bring her boy home. And he wanted to have something to give you. He wanted to teach you how to drive it, just like his daddy taught him. The image hit me with the force of a physical blow. I imagined an old man, alone in this silence, wrenching on bolts with painful hands, trying to fix a machine because he couldn't fix his family. "He died 5 years ago," Martha said. Ruth followed him 6 months later. "They died of broken hearts, Leo. They watched every car that came down that road." I stood up, walking to the edge of the porch. The tractor didn't look like garbage anymore. It looked like a monument to regret. "I can't stay here," I said, my voice trembling. "Look at this place, Martha. It's destroyed." "The house is wood and plaster," Martha said, standing up to join me. "Wood and plaster can be fixed. The land is still good underneath the weeds. And that tractor, Samuel put his soul into that engine. It might look rough on the outside, but I bet the insides are clean." She put a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was strong. "You have nowhere else to go, do you?" I shook my head. "Then stay a week," she said. "I'll bring you food. There's a spring up the hill for water. Just see what's here. Don't leave them again." I looked at the key in my hand. I thought about the emptiness of the orphanage, the nothingness of my future. Then I looked at the tractor, imagining Samuel's shaking hands polishing a bolt. "Okay," I said. 1 week. The first 3 days were a blur of physical punishment. I decided that if I was going to stay, even for a week, I couldn't live in a jungle. I found a rusted scythe in the remains of the barn and spent the daylight hours swinging it until my palms blistered and bled. The physical pain was a relief. It was louder than the thoughts in my head. I cleared the yard, slashing through 10 years of neglect. I bathed in the icy creek that ran along the property line, scrubbing the grime off my skin with sand and freezing water. At night, I slept on a pile of old quilts I found in a cedar chest that the raccoons hadn't managed to gnaw through. It was on the 4th day, while it was raining, that I moved inside. The roof leak had rotted out a section of the hallway floor. I was prying up the black, spongy boards with a crowbar I'd found, intending to just cover the hole with plywood when I saw it. Wedged between the studs in the wall, hidden behind the plaster, was a cigar box. I pulled it out. It was dry, protected from the elements. I sat on the floor, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof above, and opened the lid. The hinges creaked, rusty and stiff. Inside, there was no money. There were envelopes, 17 of them. Each one was addressed in blue ink to our grandchild. My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the first one. The handwriting was firm. "Happy first birthday." I opened it. It was a generic card with a cartoon bear. Inside, Samuel had written, "We pray for you every night. We hope you are safe. We hope she is holding you tight." I opened the next one, and the next. I watched the years pass in ink. I watched Samuel's handwriting go from firm loops to shaky, jagged scratches as the arthritis took him. "Happy 10th birthday. The tractor is coming along. I bought new pistons today. I hope you like engines. Happy 16th birthday. I'm tired, son. I don't know if I'll see you. But I'm keeping the place ready." They hadn't just forgotten me. They had lived every day with my absence. They wrote cards they couldn't mail because they didn't know where I was. At the bottom of the box was a small velvet pouch. I tipped it out. A silver baby bracelet, tarnished black. I rubbed it with my thumb, revealing the engraving. Claire Morgan. I sat there in the hallway of the rotting house, surrounded by 17 years of unmailed love. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a file number. I felt like a missing person who had finally been found. But I needed to know more. I needed to know her. I took the flashlight Martha had lent me and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Martha had told me that Ruth couldn't bear to touch Claire's room. She said they just closed the door the day she left. The door was stuck, swollen by humidity. I shoved it with my shoulder, and it popped open with a groan. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and dried lavender. I shone the beam around. It was a time capsule. A single bed with a quilt. A desk with a history textbook open to the Civil War. On the walls, posters of Garth Brooks and Reba McEntire curled at the edges. It was a normal room. That's what struck me most. It was the room of a girl who went to school, who did homework, who had dreams. I walked to the closet. Inside, hanging in plastic, was a blue corduroy FFA jacket. Future Farmers of America. I touched the sleeve. My mother wore this. She wasn't just a tragic figure who died young. She was a girl who judged livestock and grew corn. On the floor of the closet was a wooden box, crude and heavy, sanded smooth but clearly made by an amateur. I opened it. Inside were dried corsages from dances, a blue ribbon for a pumpkin, and a rock shaped like a heart. I turned the box over. Carved into the bottom with a pocket knife, in deep, deliberate strokes, were words, Claire Morgan. This farm is my heart. I stared at the carving until the letters blurred. She loved this place. The narrative I had built in my head, that she ran away because she hated the farm, hated the life, was wrong. She loved it. She wanted to come home. I whispered to the empty room. She wanted me to be here. The realization broke me. I sank to the floor, clutching the wooden box against my chest. I cried for the girl who carved her name in wood, thinking she had forever. I cried for the childhood I should have had in this room, watching the seasons change out that window. I cried until I was hollowed out, and in that hollowness, something new began to take root. A sense of ownership. This wasn't just a rotting house. It was her heart. And now, it was mine. The next morning, the silence of the farm felt too loud. I needed to see people. I needed to confirm that the world outside this time capsule still existed. I walked the 5 miles into town. Morgan Hollow was barely a town. It was a strip of buildings clinging to the side of the road. Most were boarded up, but the diner, the Chat and Chew, had a neon sign that buzzed with a defiant hum. I walked in. The bell above the door chimed. The air smelled of bacon grease and old coffee, a comforting, permanent smell. There were 3 old men in a booth, and a guy behind the counter wiping down the formica. The man behind the counter looked up. He was in his 60s, balding, with a kind face that had seen too much worry. He froze when he saw me. The rag in his hand stopped moving. He squinted, leaning over the counter. Then, his face went pale. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. "You have her eyes." The diner went silent. The old men in the booth turned to look. "You're Claire's boy," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Leo," I said, feeling exposed. The man came around the counter. He wiped his hands on his apron and extended one. "Tommy Bates, I own this place. I went to school with your mama. We sat next to each other in algebra." He shook my hand, and he didn't let go immediately. He held it, looking at me like I was a ghost. "Sit down, son. On the house. Whatever you want." I sat at the counter. Tommy poured me coffee and put a slice of cherry pie in front of me. "Martha told me someone was at the farm," he said quietly. I didn't want to believe it. "Why not?" "Because of how it ended," Tommy said. He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You know about the night she left?" "Martha told me she ran away." Tommy shook his head. "She didn't run, Leo. She was driven out. But that's not the whole story. Martha, she might not have told you the rest. Maybe she didn't want to hurt you." "Tell me," I said. Tommy sighed, looking out the window at the empty street. "Claire didn't just leave once. She came back." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "What?" "6 months after you were born," Tommy said. "It was autumn. I was closing up the diner. I saw her walking up the road. She looked distinct, thin, tired. But she was carrying a bundle. You." He looked me in the eye. "She'd been living in shelters, Leo, working terrible jobs. But she came back because she wanted her parents to know you. She wanted to make peace. I felt a cold chill ripple down my spine. What happened? I followed her at a distance, just in case she needed a ride. Tommy said. She walked right up to the property line. Samuel was there. He was checking the fence. I watched them from the road. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard the tone. Samuel was shouting. He was screaming about sin, about shame. He pointed at you, at the baby, and he yelled, "No daughter of mine." He told her to get off his land. I gripped the edge of the counter. The anger I had felt earlier returned, hotter this time. Samuel wasn't just a sad old man restoring a tractor. He was a monster. Claire came back down the road. Tommy continued, his voice thick with emotion. She was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She came here. I gave her all the cash in the register, about $80. I put her on the bus to Lexington. That was the last time I saw her. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. 3 weeks later, we heard about the accident. An icy road in Ohio. She was gone. And Samuel? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Did he celebrate? No, Tommy said sharply. That's the tragedy, Leo. That night broke him. When he got the news, she was dead. Something in him died too. That self-righteous pride just evaporated. He spent every day of the next 12 years trying to find you. He hired lawyers he couldn't afford. But the system, you were lost in it. And he had no legal standing because he disowned her. Tommy reached out and touched my arm. He became a ghost. He stopped coming to town. He just worked on that tractor. He told me once, "Tommy, if I fix the machine, maybe God will fix the mistake." He was a man in hell, Leo, a hell of his own making. I stood up. I couldn't breathe in the diner anymore. He turned us away. I said. He looked at his own daughter and grandson and turned us away. He did, Tommy said. And he paid for it, with every breath he took after that. But listen to me, Leo. Your mama loved you enough to walk back into the lion's den. She loved you enough to swallow her pride to give you a home. That's the blood you have in your veins. Strong blood. I walked out of the diner and didn't stop. I walked the 5 miles back, my legs burning. I walked right up to the property line Tommy described. I stood there in the weeds. I closed my eyes and tried to hear them. The shouting, the crying. I tried to imagine my mother, young and terrified, holding me, facing a father who chose dogma over love. "I'm here!" I yelled at the empty sky. "I made it back!" My voice echoed off the hills. There was no answer. Just the wind in the trees. But standing there, the anger began to drain away, replaced by a profound, heavy sorrow. I realized that the tragedy wasn't just that they died. It was that they loved each other, and fear and pride had kept them apart until it was too late. I walked back to the tractor. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the hood. It wasn't just a machine. It was an apology cast in iron. The next few weeks were a transformation, not just of the farm, but of the town's relationship to me. Tommy must have told people I was there, and that I was staying. It started with Pastor David Williams. He drove up in a sedan that had seen better days. He didn't preach at me. He just stood in the yard and told me about a Sunday morning 5 years ago, when Samuel had interrupted the service. He stood up right in the middle of the hymn, the pastor told me, shaking his head. He walked to the altar and fell on his knees. He confessed to the whole congregation. He said, "I drove my child away, and the Lord has taken her. Pray for my soul, because I am lost." We all cried with him, Leo. He was a broken man trying to find his way back to grace. Then came Betty Miller from the hardware store. She pulled up in a delivery van loaded with shingles, nails, and 5 gallons of white paint. When I told her I couldn't pay, she waved me off. "Your grandmother," Betty said, leaning against the van. "She used to come in once a month. She'd buy boys' clothes, t-shirts, jeans, little sneakers. She'd guess your size. She'd say, 'He must be getting tall now, Betty.' She'd keep them for a month, hoping you'd show up. When you didn't, she'd donate them to the shelter in the next county. She did that for over a decade. I'm not charging you for shingles, Leo. Consider it a debt paid by Ruth." We patched the roof together. The community didn't see a stranger. They saw a chance to heal a wound in their own history. But the tractor remained the center of my world. I had cleared the weeds around it, scrubbed the moss off the tires, and polished the rust until the metal gleamed with a dull, dark patina. But I didn't know how to make it run. That's when Jake Sullivan showed up. Jake was the town mechanic, a giant of a man with grease permanently etched into his skin. He drove a tow truck that sounded like a tank. He walked into the yard, carrying a red toolbox the size of a suitcase. He walked straight to the John Deere 4020. He patted the fender like it was a loyal dog. "Samuel called me the week before he died," Jake said, not looking at me. He popped the latches on his toolbox. He made me swear on a Bible. He said, "Jake, if that boy ever comes, if he ever brings the key, you make sure this engine turns over. It has to work for him. It has to." Jake looked at me then, grinning through a beard that was mostly gray. "I intend to keep that promise, Leo. You ready to get your hands dirty?" For the next week, Jake became my professor. We tore that engine down. We drained the varnish that used to be fuel. We replaced the filters, the battery, the plugs. Jake showed me how to bleed the injector lines, how to check the compression. As we worked, I learned about Samuel. He was meticulous, Jake said, torquing a bolt. He sanded these cylinder heads by hand. He sourced original parts from 3 different states. He wasn't just fixing a tractor, Leo. He was building a legacy. He wanted you to have something that would last, something that could work the land. By Wednesday, we were close. The tractor smelled of fresh diesel and oil, a sharp, clean scent that cut through the smell of decay on the farm. On Thursday evening, just as the sun was dipping below the tree line, Martha walked up the driveway. She had a strange look on her face, a mix of anticipation and anxiety. "It's time," she said. "Time for what?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax. "Ruth gave me this," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. She said, "Give it to him when he stays, not when he arrives, but when he decides to stay." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like it contained more than paper. I sat on the edge of the tractor tire, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jake stepped back, giving me space. Martha stood close, her hand hovering near my shoulder. I broke the seal. The letter was written on stationery that smelled faintly of rosewater. The handwriting was shaky, the loops trailing off where strength had failed, but the message was clear. "To our grandchild, if you are reading this, you found your way home. I am so sorry we weren't there to meet you. I am sorry for so many things. Your grandfather was a hard man, made harder by his own father, and made harder by a world that taught him pride mattered more than love. But I watched him break under the weight of what he had done. Every night for 12 years, he prayed for forgiveness, for what he said to Claire, for turning you away, for letting pride destroy our family. Every morning he walked these fields hoping to make them beautiful for you. He never forgave himself. I'm not sure he could. But he loved you. We both loved you. We loved Claire. And we failed you all. The tractor key. Your mother took that key from the hook by the door the night she left, 17 and scared. She must have kept it safe all those years. Samuel knew it was missing. When he started restoring the tractor, he told me, "Ruth, someone out there has the key to this farm. I have to make sure the engine is ready for them when they come back." He wanted you to use it. He wanted you to have this land, this home, these roots. I hope you can forgive us. I hope you can forgive him. And I hope somehow you can feel us here with you, in the soil, in the fields, in that old tractor. We never stopped loving you. We never stopped waiting. Your mother loved this farm. She loved these fields. In my heart, I believe she was bringing you here because she wanted you to know this land, to know where you came from. She wanted you to have what was stolen from her, a place to belong. This is your home. It always was. And we're here with you, me, your grandfather, and your beautiful mother. All of us are in this soil. All of us are in your blood. Welcome home, sweetheart. Welcome home, Grandma Ruth. I read it twice. The tears came hot and fast, dripping onto the paper, blurring the blue ink. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. I let the grief wash over me. Not the angry, bitter grief I had arrived with, but a clean, healing grief. I forgave them. I forgave the old man who shouted at the property line. Because I knew the old man who sanded the engine block for a key he couldn't see. I forgave the grandmother who didn't fight back because I knew the grandmother who bought clothes for a ghost. "They loved you," Martha whispered, her hand resting on my head. "They just loved you so much." "I know," I choked out. "I can feel it." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, right next to my heart. I looked at the tractor. I looked at Jake. "Let's fire it up," I said. I climbed into the seat. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a cold piece of metal. It felt like a handshake. It felt like a grandfather's lap. I put the key, my key, into the ignition. "Give it a little throttle," Jake instructed. "She's been sleeping a long time." I turned the key. The starter whined with a desperate, high-pitched struggle. I held my breath. Chug! A puff of black smoke shot out of the stack. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, Samuel." I turned it again. After a brief struggle, the engine caught. It roared to life, a deep, resonant diesel thunder that shook the seat, shook the ground, shook the very air in the valley. It was loud and raw and beautiful. The vibration traveled up my spine. It was the sound of a heart starting to beat again after 20 years of silence. Jake let out a whoop and threw his hat in the air. Martha was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth, smiling behind her tears. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the power of the machine beneath me. I revved the engine, and the sound echoed off the hills, announcing to the trees, the rocks, and the ghosts that a Morgan was back on the tractor. We celebrated on Thanksgiving. It had been 3 months since I arrived. The leaves had turned to gold and fire, red and fallen, leaving the trees bare against the gray sky. But inside the farmhouse, it was warm. Betty had helped me fix the stove. Tommy had brought over enough food to feed an army: turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, and his famous yeast rolls. Martha made green bean casserole and 3 kinds of pie. We sat around the dining room table, which I had sanded down and refinished. The gouges and scars in the wood were still there, but they were smooth now, polished to a shine. I looked around the table. There was Martha, who had fed me when I was a stranger; Tommy, who had given my mother her last kindness; Jake, who had helped me keep a dead man's promise; Pastor Williams, who had held the community's grief; and Betty, who had clothed me in spirit before she ever met me. This was my inheritance. Not just the land, not just the tractor, but these people. This web of connection that had survived tragedy. Martha stood up, raising a glass of cider. "To the Morgan family," she said, her voice steady. "To Samuel and Ruth, who are surely watching. To Claire, who found her way back. And to Leo, who stayed." To Leo, they all chorused. "To home." We ate and laughed and told stories. I learned that my mother had a laugh that could shatter glass. I learned that my grandfather could play the harmonica. I learned that my grandmother made the best apple butter in the state. I gathered these pieces of them, hoarding them like treasure. After dinner, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, I stepped outside. I wore a heavy coat now, and heavy boots. I walked out to the tractor, which was parked by the barn. I climbed up and sat on the fender, looking out over the fields. I had planted winter wheat in the lower 40 acres. It was a gamble, but Jake had helped me plow, and Tommy had fronted me the seed money. Now, in the fading light, I could see the faint green haze of the new crop pushing up through the dark soil. It was fragile, but it was there. Martha came out and stood beside the tractor. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just watched the sunset with me. "Your grandfather would be proud of those straight rows," she said finally. "He was a stickler for straight rows." "I used the marker arm," I admitted. Martha chuckled. "He did too, even if he claimed he did it by eye." She looked at me, her face softening. "You have his stubbornness, Leo, and Ruth's kindness, but you have Claire's heart. You loved this land like she did." I pulled the key from my pocket. I had put it on a sturdy silver chain around my neck. It caught the last rays of the sun, glowing warm and bright. "I wish I could have known them," I said, the old ache surfacing one last time. "You do know them," Martha said firmly. "You're standing in their life's work. You're living their dream. Every time you turn that key, You're shaking Samuel's hand. Every time you plant a seed, you're hugging Ruth. And every time you look in the mirror, well, you're seeing Claire. She squeezed my hand. You're not an orphan anymore, Leo. You never really were. You were just away. I'm home, I whispered. The words felt solid. True. Yes, Martha said, turning back toward the warmth of the house. You are. You finally are. I stayed on the tractor as the stars began to poke through the twilight. I listened to the wind rustling the new wheat. I felt the vibration of the earth, a low hum of life and history. I held the key tight in my fist. I was Leo Morgan. I was the grandson of Samuel and Ruth. I was the son of Claire. I was the steward of Morgan Hollow. The broken tractor was running. The fields were green. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to The Farmer's Promise and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of resilience, hidden truths, and the families we build when life gives us a second chance. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.